The problem, in one word, and this is going to be sort of the watchword of this entire podcast, is insulin. Insulin's the bad guy in this story.
Welcome to the Learn Skin podcast with me, Dr. Raja.
And me, Dr. Hadar, where we discuss all things skin.
Join us as we delve into the art and science of skin health in today's episode.
Hey, Raja, can you say the thing I told you to tell them?
Of course. We are board-certified dermatologists. This podcast is meant for educational and informational purposes only and is not considered medical advice, nor does it serve as a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. All opinions shared do not express the views of Learn Health, Inc. Let's get to the good stuff.
Hey, Raja, how are you today?
Hey, what's up, Hadar? What are we talking about today? A new season, a new conversation. I think we're talking something much deeper than just the skin.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, congratulations. The new season is starting, new conversations. We are jam-packed with our program with new speakers and new guests, and I'm very excited to share another season with you, my friend. And yes, today we're talking about my favorite thing to do, food and eating. And I think it's a guilty pleasure of everybody. And speaking about being guilty and feeling pleasure, we have a special guest who probably made his career talking about this guilty pleasure of eating. So you want to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. I'll do my best to just give a short intro, but man, we are going to get into some of the books that have been written and some of the real deep conversations that we don't get in medical education. I know we're touching on that too. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Robert Lustig. He's a neuroendocrinologist with an expertise in metabolism, obesity, and nutrition. One of the leaders of the current anti-sugar movement that is really changing the food industry. And he's an Emeritus Professor of Pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and a member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF. Dr. Lustig, welcome to the podcast. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me, both of you, Hadar and Raja. It's my pleasure. I just want you to know, okay, when it comes to dermatology, you guys are the experts.
Well, we are always excited to discuss the connection. And certainly you have mastered a way of taking these complex processes that are happening in the cells and in the liver and in the gut and in the brain and really making it available to the general audience in your previous books. And I do want to mention Dr. Lustig's most recent book. One of his many, many accomplishments, he is a New York Times bestselling author, and his new book is called Metabolical. It's available wherever you can get books. And I got to tell you, I read this cover to cover, and I'm going to read it again because I'm sure I breezed over some of these subtleties. I think, Dr. Lustig, maybe we should begin at the beginning. Can you tell us, because you worked with kids, right? And I was wondering, a lot of us docs, we see patients, we talk to them, the day goes by, another clinic, another patient. But then sometimes we see things that kind of really leave us to think and kind of, I know myself, I kind of get an extra turn at night before I fall asleep thinking about a patient. How did you get into thinking beyond that next patient in clinic?
Well, first of all, it's Rob. I don't go by Dr. Lustig, especially now that I'm retired. Nobody should be called Dr. Lustig. I've asked that question of myself many times as well. And, I started out as a pediatric endocrinologist thinking that I was going to spend my career taking care of short kids. And that was fine. And I was perfectly okay with that. And then the short kids got fat on me. And it happened on my watch. I watched it happen. And, having been a fat kid myself, I watched all of these parents trying to deal with the problem and, with no success. And I also saw what society did. And they basically said, it's your fault. And, as a pediatrician, it's really hard for me to assign a fault to a kid, especially to a baby. And, then when we found that we had an epidemic of obese 6-month-olds, and now we have the data to show that we have an epidemic of obese newborns, they don't diet and exercise.
Yes.
So any theory that you want to proffer to explain the obesity, diabetes, chronic disease pandemic, by the way, not just America, the whole world, has to be able to explain the obese newborn too. And you can't. And so I was aware of that, and I was doing research, and I was specifically doing research on a disorder where we knew it wasn't their fault. This is a disorder called hypothalamic obesity. As a neuroendocrinologist, I took care of a lot of kids with brain tumors. That was kind of my bread and butter, as it were. And I was at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and I had a cadre of kids who had survived their brain tumor in terms of surgery, radiation therapy, chemotherapy, only to succumb to massive, overwhelming obesity after the tumor was diagnosed and treated. So these were normal kids until the tumor. It couldn't be gluttony and sloth. It had to be biochemical.
Right.
And so researching that made it very clear what the problem was. The problem, in one word, and this is going to be sort of the watchword of this entire podcast, is insulin. Insulin's the bad guy in this story. Now, all of your listeners think, oh, insulin's the good guy because, after all, we take diabetics and we give them shots of insulin to bring their blood glucose down. But
right.
when you give a diabetic a shot of insulin, yes, the blood glucose goes down, but where does it go? What happened to it? And most diabetics don't know.
You know what, Rob? This is very interesting because, and Hadar has heard me talk about this as well, but in the acne literature, and I think we can bring this to skin very quickly. In the acne literature, when you look at all the foods that stimulate and overstimulate acne to go into overdrive or stimulate the sebaceous glands to go into overdrive, it's anything that upregulates insulin.
Yeah.
And so in our world, bringing insulin up is actually not a great thing. So this is actually very interesting for me to hear. I just can't wait to hear more of where this conversation is going, but I just want you to know that we are not team insulin on this side. I mean, we know it's good for certain reasons, but man, anything that spikes insulin has not been good to us in multiple skin conditions.
Well, in multiple health conditions too. So the fact of the matter is that insulin is always a good news, bad news deal. It's good acutely because it brings your blood glucose down and keeps you from going into ketoacidosis. And it's bad because it causes cell proliferation in the skin, in the kidney, in the breast, in the coronary vasculature. So the bottom line is insulin is always short-term gain for long-term pain. And we now have a high insulin culture. 88% of Americans have an inappropriately high fasting insulin level. 88% of Americans are metabolically dysfunctional.
Gosh, I have to jump in and ask this next question of you, Rob, because I'm on the edge of my seat on this one. Because we all have been taught that refined sugars are where you're going to spike the insulin and really push that pathway. But I'm hearing, and even our research has started to show there's other foods in there, and I cannot wait to hear you talk about why are we what is the foods that is driving this high insulin culture, in your opinion? Or what is it that's driving this culture, generally speaking?
Well, I'll sum it up in 2 words. Ultra-processed food. Ultra-processed food. So my question to both of you is ultra-processed food food?
That's a tough question because we eat it all the time. But the question, I guess, is how do we define food?
Well, that's right. How do we define food? So you have to go to the dictionary, which I did. And the definition of food, and I'm very comfortable with this definition as a scientist, is the following: substrate that contributes either to the growth or burning of an organism. I have no problem with that definition. It's a fine definition. Substrate that contributes either to the growth or burning of an organism. But what if a substrate does not do that? Is it food?
Well, I suppose by this definition, it doesn't. And I think when I read in your book about what is being done to the food, which actually I found myself telling my teenage daughter the other day, she was looking at a label and I was finding myself quoting your book, saying it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food. And we've stripped all the nutritional gains from it, right? Is that what you think the data is showing?
Well, so it's something very specific. So let's talk about burning first. Right? So if you look at the molecule sucrose, dietary sugar, the stuff you put in your coffee, the white crystals, right? There are two molecules in there. One's called glucose, one's called fructose. Now, glucose is the energy of life. Every cell on the planet burns glucose for energy. Glucose is so goddamn important that if you don't consume it, your body makes it. It's called gluconeogenesis. So fatty acids and proteins will go to your liver. The liver will turn that energy into glucose so that you can have a serum glucose level. Everyone has a serum glucose level. The only way to not have a serum glucose level is to be dead.
So glucose is food.
Glucose is food because glucose contributes to the burning of an organism. And it turns out that glucose actually increases mitochondrial ATP generation, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the chemical energy that powers cells. So it's all about whether or not your mitochondria can make ATP. And glucose, for lack of a better word, makes lots of ATP. So glucose is food. No argument. But now let's take the other molecule, fructose. Now, fructose is very sweet. Turns out there is no biochemical reaction in any animal cell on the planet that requires dietary fructose for running any reaction. It is completely vestigial to all vertebrate life.
That's kind of amazing and shocking at the same time because every label that I read on most foods has some kind of fructose in it, right? Isn't that
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
ubiquitous?
Yeah. And you know why? Because it's addictive.
Yeah, it makes the food addictive. Exactly.
Right. We actually have the data to show this compound works on the reward center of your brain, the nucleus accumbens, the same area that cocaine, heroin, nicotine, alcohol works on, and does the exact same thing, generates a dopamine response. And every compound that generates a dopamine response in the extreme is addictive. Well, sugar's addictive too. So, ever heard somebody say, "Oh, I have a horrible sweet tooth"?
Yes.
That's sugar addiction until proven otherwise. Fructose, this addictive molecule, this very sweet molecule, the molecule that the food industry uses as the hook to get you to buy more, turns out it actually inhibits mitochondrial function. It inhibits ATP generation. It inhibits count them, three separate enzymes that are necessary for mitochondria to function normally. It inhibits AMP kinase, the fuel gauge on the liver cell. It inhibits ACAD-L, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase long chain, which is necessary for fatty acid oxidation. And lastly, it inhibits carnitine palmitoyl transferase 1, which is the enzyme that regenerates carnitine, which is the shuttle mechanism by which fatty acids get from outside the mitochondria to inside the mitochondria for burning. So, in fact, fructose, even though it's 4 calories per gram, even though if you blow it up in a bomb calorimeter, it releases energy, in your mitochondria, it does the opposite. It actually inhibits energy production. So, is sugar food? Well, we still have growth to go. We haven't gotten there yet. So my colleague, Dr. Afrat Monsanigo Ornan, who's the head of nutrition at Hebrew University, Jerusalem, just published 3 papers demonstrating that sugar actually inhibits skeletal growth. It inhibits skeletal elongation. And we also have data that shows that it hijacks the normal growth process to generate cancer. So does sugar meet the criteria of food?
Well, it sounds like by this definition, fructose is really guilty of not being food
Yeah.
in this court.
But sugar is the hallmark. It is the bulwark of ultra-processed food. And 56% of the sugar in our diet is found in ultra-processed food, and 67% of the sugar in kids' diets is in ultra-processed food.
Well, I was going to say, what's really fascinating? There's an herb called Gymnema sylvester, which goes by in Ayurvedic medicine, Shardunica, that I will give to people to try to curb their sugar cravings
I'm
because
aware of it.
one of the things that, and we do this in our herbal session, we have everyone put it on their tongue and it knocks out their taste buds and then eat stuff that they've always taken for granted. And it's mind blowing what tastes have shifted, especially in processed foods. So
Yeah.
this is fascinating. This whole conversation is just fascinating. I mean, even down to things like milk tastes different.
Yes, absolutely. So one company's actually commercialized that. So I'm aware of it. The bottom line is our food has been, and there's no other way to put it, our food's been poisoned. And our food's been poisoned because of the addition of sugar, but also another thing, the removal of fiber. Now, people think fiber is the stuff you throw in the garbage after you juice the fruit. Turns out the fiber is the food for your bacteria in your gut. And you have to feed your bacteria or they will feed on you.
Now you're singing our tune.
So you have 30 trillion cells in your body, but you have 100 trillion bacteria in your intestine. They outnumber you 3-1. The point is, they got to eat something. Well, what do they eat? Well, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? And when you don't feed them what they need, they will actually strip the mucin layer right off your intestinal epithelial cells, denuding your intestine and rendering you much more likely to get an inflammatory bowel disease, leaky gut, autoimmune disease, and chronic metabolic disease because of the passage of toxins from the intestinal inside, the lumen, into your bloodstream.
And leaky gut has absolutely been linked to some dermatological conditions such as atopic dermatitis, no doubt about it. But I want to go back to fiber because I think it's really important for our listeners to understand. So, isn't fiber also part of the carbohydrate when I look at the label? Isn't that listed there? What should I pay attention to when I look at this to get more fiber in my diet?
Right. So that's exactly right. Fiber. So the way the nutrition facts label is currently structured, what you'll see is total carbohydrate, and then you'll see added sugars on some labels, not all, not yet. And then you'll see dietary fiber. And what you have to realize is that added sugar and dietary fiber contribute to that total carbohydrate. So what you need to do is you need to take the total carbohydrate number, subtract the added sugars, then subtract the dietary fiber to actually figure out how much starch is in that. And then what you need to do is take that number and divide it by the fiber to figure out what the ratio of starch to fiber is.
My
Now,
gosh, that's complicated.
well, I know, and we're
Can't we
trying to.
simplify it?
No, we can't, and that's the problem is we can't simplify it because that's what the food industry has done very specifically to hide their handiwork. This is their gravy train. This is their juggernaut. We could fix it, but the FDA and the USDA have no interest in fixing it at the moment because then they couldn't sell food.
Well, I wanted to go from fiber to another myth that you so elegantly break into pieces in your book about the issue of calorie being a calorie. Because, we've learned that if I just eat less and I just exercise more, I'm going to count the calories off, kind of burn my excess calories, and then I'll be fine, right? I'll be able to lose weight, be healthy. But you suggest that that's not so true, right?
No, that's the myth. It doesn't work. And all you have to do is just look around to show how it doesn't work. This is the myth of calories. And my job is to kill the calorie. If I am successful, we can turn this ship around. But ultimately, if you believe that calories are what's going on, you will never, ever be able to fix the problem. And it's what the food industry hides behind. And here's why. 2013, every football game in America sponsored a 2-minute video from Coca-Cola called Coming Together. And there was a sentence in that video that said the following: beating obesity will take action by all of us based on one simple common sense fact. All calories count, no matter where they come from, including Coca-Cola and everything else with calories.
Now, on its face, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's just simple economics now.
Yeah, on the surface, you can get your calories from carrots, or you can get your calories from cheesecake, or you can get your calories from Coca-Cola, or you can get your calories from kumquats. Doesn't matter. Because if you eat more than you burn, you will gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight. Therefore, it's about energy balance. Therefore, it's about calories in, calories out. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, diet and exercise. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. All of that comes from this notion that calories are fungible, that any one calorie is like any other calorie.
So why is it not true?
Well, a calorie burned is a calorie burned in terms of the unit of energy, but a calorie eaten is not a calorie eaten because it depends on where that calorie goes. It depends on what happens to it. And I'll give you 4 examples right now to
Great. Yes.
prove, dispel this notion of calories. Let's start with almonds. You guys like almonds?
Oh, Raja has studied it.
Yeah, almonds are pretty good. Okay, I love almonds. Okay, you eat 160 calories in almonds. How many of those do you absorb?
I'm not sure.
130. You ate 160, you absorbed 130. Where'd the other 30 go?
Well, maybe to your microbiome.
Yes, that's right. Ding, ding.
Okay, Raja, I got 1 point.
No, you got 1 point, my friend. That's good. Hadar won.
So you ate 160. The fiber in the almonds, both soluble and insoluble, set up a gel. They form a gel on the inside of your intestine, which acts as a secondary barrier that prevents a certain amount of those calories from actually being absorbed. So they go further down the intestine where the microbiome will chew it up for its own purposes. So even though you consumed it, even though it passed your lips, you didn't get it because a calorie is not a calorie. Because if it comes with fiber, that calorie wasn't for you.
Right. So I'm starting to follow the idea here. So basically, you can put stuff into your mouth, but really it's what gets to your mitochondria, right?
That's right. It's what gets to your mitochondria. And that's not what the dietitians are counting up. It's exactly right. Protein. So you can break amino acids down for energy and burn them in your liver, or you can burn carbohydrate in your liver. Turns out when you burn a protein in your liver has to take the amino group off the amino acid in order to be able to use it for energy production. Right? Turns out that costs energy. You actually end up using up energy when you do that. So on net balance, even though you end up with the same 4 calories per gram as you did with carbohydrate, you actually had to expend energy to get there. So the net is less. So calorie is not a calorie because if it came from protein, it's not going to cause as much weight gain. Number 3, fat. So on this side, we have omega-3s, heart healthy, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-inflammatory, save your life, single best thing you can put in your mouth. And on the other side, we have trans fats, the devil incarnate. Okay, consumable poison will kill you. They're both 9 calories per gram. One will save your life, one will kill you. Why? Because a calorie is not a calorie. And lastly, fructose and glucose. And I've already explained that one because glucose is food and fructose is not food. Well, if it's not food, what is it? If it's inhibiting mitochondrial function, if it's inhibiting ATP generation, you know what we call that? We call that a poison. Do you know what else inhibits mitochondrial ATP generation? Cyanide.
Yes, that incidentally, that's actually the example I give my patients when they seek something natural or organic. I tell them, that's not necessarily equivalent to healthy.
Indeed.
Rob, I wanted to make sure that we also give some time to discuss the patient because we spoke about a high level about some of the food industry, some of the things that are going wrong with our food, processed food being the number one leading process here. But I want to touch about this from a patient point of view because at the end of the day, most of us are sitting in clinic. Tomorrow we're going to go to clinic. We're going to see another patient, another patient. What kind of simple tools we can give our patients to take the first steps into eating healthier?
Right. So most important thing that we did in our clinic at UCSF, the Weight Assessment for Teen and Child Health Clinic, was we did a teaching breakfast. 6 kids, 6 parents, 1 dietitian around a communal table. We fed them. We showed them what should be on their breakfast table. Now, they all came fasting because they were all getting their blood drawn, for comorbidity labs. Okay,
Right.
so they're all hungry. All right. And so we're trying to explain to them what it is that they should be eating. They need to eat a low insulin diet. They need to eat foods that don't jack up their insulin. Now, you can explain what those are, but it doesn't matter because they're going to go home and they're going to do just what they normally do.
Right.
What we did was we fed these kids a low insulin diet. And we fed the parents a low insulin diet at the same time, and they all had their chances to ask their questions, and the dietitian narrated what was going on. And four things had to come out of that teaching breakfast. Number one, the parent had to see the kid would eat the food. Number two, the parent had to see the parent would eat the food. Number three, the parent had to see other kids would eat the food because they got other kids at home. And number four, we showed them the bill and showed them they could afford the food.
Oh, that's important. The ka-ching factor.
When we ticked all four boxes, there was no going back. Those kids got better. And the reason was because the parents got it. They saw it. Because no parent is going to go to a store and buy anything that they think their kids won't eat. And you know what? No adult will go to a store and buy something that they think that they won't eat either. So there's a little bit of see one, do one, teach one here, which of course is, what we all learned in medical school.
Right.
But that's what we got to do for people. So we can give them the education, but education alone is not enough. We actually have to show them. And that's going to be tough, but we
Right.
do it. And that's one of the reasons why I give talks and write books, and why nutritionists around the country are adopting this model. And we're working on a K-12 education curriculum for kids, so where they will actually cook in school and eat their own stuff in order to be able to generate this concept at an earlier and earlier age. So all is not lost. There are ways to do this, but obviously, we got big bucks on the other side trying to keep people, shall we say, hoodwinked and enslaved, with our current processed food debacle.
Well, Rob, I do have to ask you then, because first of all, this is really important insight that is not being taught in any of the medical schools. And we can, probably have a whole nother podcast about medical education. But I do want to ask you, what are the culprit foods that you think we've all taken for granted that is really not helpful or probably detrimental that you would cut out if you were able to talk to anyone? They're like, tell me what I should cut out. Are there like a top 3 or top 5 foods that you would say just avoid?
Well, there are a lot of foods that purport to be healthy and aren't. They're not necessarily the overriding factor foods. I mean, the single biggest, dump bucket is sugared beverages. I mean, every sugar beverage has to just leave. That's 40% of SNAP purchases, in terms of, the lower income class.
Right. That's the food stamps program, right?
Food stamps,
Yeah.
right. That's the first thing that has to go. But, after that, there's all sorts of other junk, granola bars, yogurt, salad dressing. The bottom line is that people don't understand what's going on. And if they don't understand, then they're doomed to repeat, these problems for the rest of their lives. They need to understand that it's not what's in the food. It's what's been done to the food. All food is inherently good. It's what we do to the food that's not. And any food that has a label, a nutrition facts label, you need to view that as a warning label, because that means that something's been done to the food. Is there a label on a radish? Is there a label on a broccoli? Is there a label on a fennel? Is there a label on a raspberry? No. All right. Only if something's been done to it. People need to understand that if there's a label on a food, that means that it's been processed in some fashion. Now, some processing is not a big deal, like, for instance, apple slices. You can buy apple slices in a bag, and it will say ingredients, apples. Okay, but as soon as you get up into the 5 ingredients or more range, as soon as you get into the, I can't pronounce this word range, okay, you are in ultra processed food territory. And it has been shown by my colleague, Dr. Carlos Montero at University of Sao Paulo, that it is that ultra processed food category that drives all the chronic disease. So that's the goal. Get rid of that class called class 4, ultra processed food. And it's easy to tell. Okay. It's got a logo.
Right, exactly. And I thought in your book, again, that's Metabolical, that in the book you described some other labeling system. And I think I'm going to adopt this kind of idea to explain to my patients, which is, there's obviously stuff that's not been processed. You buy an apple, it's not been processed. But there's also the lightly processed food, which is maybe, and tell me if you disagree, but maybe frozen vegetables. Is that lightly? Or you
That's
mentioned the
lightly
apple, right?
processed.
And then anything above that has been processed, and you should, eat at your own risk. You got to be careful
Mhm.
about those things and understand that there is a balance. And I think, for myself, it's not you wake up one day and you just throw out the entire kitchen. You kind of start slowly, start creating new habits. I love the idea of a demonstration. Gosh, what a dream, right, Raja? We can have cooking kitchen classes in our clinic once a week.
Oh my God. I think part of it is processed food is so easy. Like they've made it so easy. And I think people don't realize that eating non-processed food can also be easy, but that's not
Right.
how it's sold.
Not only can it be easy, it can actually be cheaper, but you have to know a little bit of, shall we say, culinary skills. And we're
Right.
not teaching
Exactly.
that. That's gone from kid education. We used to have this thing called home ec. They got rid of home ec back in the 80s. And I think we need to bring back home ec, and for the boys too this time. Just don't call it home ec. Let's call it adult survival skills.
that That's great. And speaking of curriculums, I do want to touch on it briefly because you definitely don't hold punches going after the medical establishment in your book. But what can we do to make this better, specifically in medical schools? Because Raja and I always lament that, nobody taught us nutrition. We learned about, ATP and what happens with the energy, but we never really learned nutrition. So I wanted to ask you if you have, briefly a couple ideas on that, and maybe there is a medical school that I'm not aware of that's doing it right, and you want to
Well,
advertise that.
there are culinary medicine programs going on at various schools around the country. It started at Tulane with my colleague and good friend, Dr. Tim Harlan, who has now moved to George Washington University and runs the culinary medicine program there. And there are about 17 medical schools around the country that have adopted this model of having a culinary medicine program. And I think that this is, something that all medical schools need to do. Currently, only 28% of medical schools even have a nutrition curriculum. And if they do, there's only 19.6 contact hours. When you think about medical school being about 6,000 contact hours, and the fact that 75% of the disease is nutrition related, that's not given it very much shrift. So I think that, we really need to rethink medical education. And I'll tell you that, in the book, I make it very clear the reason that medical education sucks, and, I'm a doctor, so I can say it, okay, is because big pharma holds the purse strings. We need to fix that.
Part of it, I have to also mention another little piece of this is that even in the schools that have high-powered nutrition programs, their professors aren't teaching the classes because there's so much around promotions and making sure people have enough lectures that they don't necessarily pull in the researchers that are doing the on the ground nutrition research. They're trying to make sure that their faculty have enough lectures so that they can, state what they need for promotions and kind of not giving the students all the resources that are possible. I've
Well,
seen this specifically at some of the medical schools, and it's just a little bit disappointing when I see that.
the way I would put it is this: nutrition is what happens between the mouth and the cell. Food science is what happens between the ground and the mouth. We need to teach medical students a little food science, because once the food's been altered, it kind of doesn't matter what happens nutrition wise.
Wow. Listen, Rob, we can go on forever with this. I had like a whole piece of paper with notes here, and we didn't even get half through this. We didn't get to talk about the 8 pathological processes that happen in the cells, and we didn't really
Invite me back.
elaborate about protect the liver, feed the gut. We kind of touched on this. There's so many different things, but I do have good news to our listeners because we are
Great news.
yes, fantastic news. We're super excited about this because Rob has graciously agreed to be the keynote speaker at the upcoming Integrative Dermatology Symposium. I know it's far away from now, but you can imagine what kind of work you need to do to kind of go toe to toe with this giant. So get the book get some reading. There's some other books in his library. Definitely look at the YouTube videos, because you can learn a lot from that, and come prepared with a question, because I can just sense that we're not going to only have very interesting time. It's definitely going to be delicious. So I want to thank you, Rob, so much for your work, not just coming here today, not just coming to the Integrative Dermatology Symposium, but really championing this idea that we can do better with our food and we can do better for our patients, and really being inspired by your patients. I think it's a message that we try to communicate through this podcast to all people who take care of others, is that you can't give up to the routine. You can't let the kids in front of you get wider and wider and not do something. And you've definitely demonstrated that it can be done. So thank you for your leadership and for translating all this complex stuff into English that I can follow. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will see you at the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode with Dr. Raja and Dr. Hadar. This podcast is brought to you by LearnSkin, leaders in integrative dermatology education. Visit learnskin.com/podcast to explore our many programs, or subscribe to the podcast today and never miss an episode. Hey, have a great day and stay curious.